And you can stuff your epoxy therapy right up your fat arse, screamed Holly, slamming the door behind her and stomping as much as a bother-booted stick insect could stomp down the stairs. This seemed rather unfair. I would readily admit to a few extra pounds, but my backside could hardly be described as fat. Nonetheless, I resolved again to exercise more, telling myself that this decision was entirely independent of Holly's remark. Thinking of whom, I realised I'd not yet heard the front door shut. After a short silence, there came the sound of feet treading softly back upstairs. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as she peered tentatively round the door. "Can I come back?" I noticed with some relief that she'd reverted to her indigenous, privately educated accent, instead of what she called her street speak, impressed as ever that she could go from county to estuary at the drop of a hat, usually one she considered me to have dropped. "This is your session," I replied evenly. "There are about 20 minutes left." She sidled back to her seat on the sofa, the slight indentation giving only a vague indication that she'd been there before, closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths, releasing them slowly. "I couldn't help it," she pleaded. "It was too much for me to hear what you said." "You could help it," I stated matter-of-factly, "but what did you hear that you chose to run off like that?" Holly gazed at me through dark, bloodshot eyes, barely distinguishable in the surrounding blackness of her makeup. She pouted her equally black lips. I was expecting some sulky protestation about the choice word, but probably from her long experience of my intransigence on this score, she proved the point by changing her mind. "You said you didn't approve of my sleeping with, having sex with," I put in quickly. I hadn't said I didn't approve, but I certainly didn't, and it most likely showed, so there was no point arguing about it. Staying neutral with Holly, though always my intention, was often very difficult. Perhaps I needed to apply the choice theory to myself more often. "Okay, having sex with," she mimicked. "Having sex with Frank." "Do you recall my words?" I asked. "You're not supposed to disapprove," she asserted, avoiding my question. "You're meant to be supporting me." "Supporting you to take care of yourself," I explained, aware that she knew full well that this was the case. "Anyway, what did I say? Do you remember?" Holly put her finger to her forehead in a mock thinking gesture. "Oh, something about multiple partners, something about risk, whatever. You were judging me." "Listen carefully. It's important. I said I was concerned that having unprotected sex with a fourth partner in the same number of weeks is a very high risk. You're right, it was a judgment. It's called assessing the reality of a situation. That requires making a judgment. In your opinion," added Holly. "I think you'll find it's the opinion of many people involved in sexual health," I insisted. "Like you care," remarked Holly as she chewed a strand of hair that had fallen from the dark, hair-gripped mound piled high on her head like candy floss. I thought how attractive she could look if only she would look after herself, if only she would care. "You think I don't care?" I asked. "I guess you do," she answered. "You couldn't put up with me if you didn't." So that's Holly. A bit of a contrast now in both tone and style. The next story is about a remarkable woman called Emily, and it's called Woody Bay. We sit in silence for some time, as we've done quite frequently. It's comfortable. There's no urgency to fill the space, no sense of time being wasted. Rather, we bask in the passing moments and find solace there. Even Emily's slightly laboured breathing seems to contribute a meditative rhythm to our shared reverie. My chest rises and falls in unison with her breath. Time passes and yet stands still. Emily is dying. For 3 years, despite knowing the poor prognosis for someone in her 80s, she underwent the toxic invasion of chemotherapy. Following several periods of treatment, remission and relapse, she resigned herself to living with cancer, and 2 years ago came into therapy with me to support her in living towards death, as she put it. Having never drunk, smoked or taken drugs in her 87 years, she's now dependent on morphine for pain relief. Yet, with a glint in her eye, she refers to herself as a late-blooming smackhead, with no complaint of unfairness at her fate. I notice the late afternoon sun shining on her head, the almost perfect yellow-pink dome of which is clearly visible beneath the few remaining wisps of white hair. If I were to touch the top of her head, her downy hair would be barely perceptible, like a light breath against my skin. I imagine letting the tips of my fingers gently trace the contours of her head, and the words, "Pass your hand over my brow," come into my mind. The first line of a poem I once knew so well, but struggle to remember now. Something about feeling where the brain grows. I think of Emily's dying brain, of the innumerable memories stored there, though some, the more recent ones, are lost to her conscious attention, lost like the poem is to me. I wish I could remember it. It has a line about being like a tree and seeing footprints leading up to it, and I think Emily would appreciate it. "I'm thinking of Woody Bay," she says softly, as if not to disturb the silence too much. "And you?" she asks. "Also trees," I reply. I make no remark about the synchronicity. Such things happen so often between Emily and me that they've become commonplace without need of mention. "Trees as a metaphor for life," I say. "Do you want to tell me about Woody Bay?" "I'm sure I must have told you before," she says, smiling. "Maybe," I say, returning her smile. "There's nothing worse than an old woman whittering on repeatedly about the past like a broken record. You must stop me if I have," she insists. "Maybe," I say again, knowing I have no intention of stopping her. "It's a good metaphor for human life, the tree," she continues. "After years of growth through the changing seasons, they dare have old age or disease, just like us." "That's true," I say. She does not say more. As the lowering sun reddens the sky, the room is bathed in a soft, warm light. She closes her eyes, and we sit again in silence for a while. I think she's asleep, but it's hard to tell. Her waking state is sometimes so ethereal. I don't know which of us may be asleep and dreaming, or awake and still dreaming, or dreaming that we are awake. I think of my grandmother and the hours I spent as a child sitting with her in a similar timelessness. It was a long time ago, but I feel the warmth of her still. Emily has the same soft, enveloping quality, like the warm sun playing upon her head as it drops forward slightly. And she is stirred by this involuntary movement and raises her eyes to mine. "It was a long time ago," she says. "Woody Bay?" I inquire. "Yes, I'm still there," she acknowledges. "It was a long time ago," I repeat, not quite knowing why I'm emphasizing this fact, though my own long time ago thought is still somewhere in my mind. She knows it only too well, has told me before that it feels like another lifetime, another world ago, even another person ago, yet it's always so present. "I was 13, I think, maybe 14 years old," she says. And if you want to know what happened to Emily at Woody Bay, a change of tone again, I think. This story involves several clients. And along with the therapist, they all illustrate one or more of the 7 deadly sins. And there's no prizes for guessing what this first client is representing. "That's a very defensive posture," remarks Ray, ex-actor turned executive coach, with little distinction between the two as far as I can see. Should I tell him why I've folded my arms? Should I tell him that it is indeed a defensive position in preparation for the rage I'm predicting will be forthcoming at any moment? I unfold my arms and say nothing. "If there's one thing that makes me so mad," says Ray, true to form, and apparently not that interested in my body posture after all, it's being interrupted. I take care not to say anything, though I am wondering whether he's referring to conversational, sexual, eliminatory, or just any general sort of interruption. Right in the middle of my lecture on the importance of timing in executive coaching, a blasted mobile starts ringing, he continues, failing to see the irony, his voice already rising a decibel or two, and his face reddening like a quickly ripening fruit. "Well, I won't have it, and I let this arrogant youth know it. I told him to get the hell out of my lecture room and never darken it again." Ray's voice has taken on a deep, melodramatic timbre that, along with the increasing volume, creates a vibration through the floorboards. At least, I think that's what's happening. Or maybe it's me trembling, praying I haven't inadvertently left my mobile in my pocket. As he bellows more about the folly of youth, the lack of rigour in the education system, the sorry state of the roads in Bristol, throwing in something about obesity for good measure. Though whether any of this applies directly to the young man in question, I have no idea. I wait for a pause in his tirade. "It reminds me of the time your father—" My father, my useless father!" shouts Ray, shaking with anger at the very mention of the man. "Don't you dare bring my father into this room!" "I think he's already here," I dare to say. Suddenly feeling braver in the face of the bullying rage that Ray directs at everyone and everything at every opportunity. Angry dad, angry son, chip off the old block, I very much think. For a moment, I wonder if I really have just said that. Ray's response confirms that I have. "You keep your thoughts to yourself if that's the best you can do," he booms across at me. "You're bloody useless. You're meant to be helping me deal with my insomnia, and all I'm getting is verbal abuse." "Maybe your father's in both of us. He's very much here now in all this anger," is what I think I'm saying in a very warm and empathic way. But what I hear coming out of my mouth, loudly, clearly and aggressively, is, "You couldn't coach a frigging flea to jump!" Where has that come from? Why am I saying it? Could it be some useful enactment we're getting into, or is it yet another sign that I'm losing the plot? Ray seems not to have noticed. He's talking about hating everyone who wears blue. I'm wearing blue. Should I change? Do I mean my shirt, or do I mean my therapeutic stance? He's off again. "It makes my blood boil the way birds fly. I hate the bloody things with their flappy wings. Why can't they walk like everyone else? Bloody outrageous. Who do they think they are?" The doorbell rings downstairs. Ray continues, oblivious to the interruption. I can't imagine who it can be. Thankfully, on this ridiculous day, Ray is my last client, so it might just be a neighbour calling by. I ignore the bell a few more times while Ray is demolishing the healthcare system and anyone who likes Schoenberg, but the bell keeps ringing, and I feel I have to answer it. I stand and make to leave, telling Ray someone's at the door. Furiously, he grasps my arm to prevent me leaving and lectures me about interruptions, which apparently make him so mad, but I feel I already know this. "This is where I came in," I say as I leave the room. Oh, do you want to just fidget? Okay, I do have a couple more prepared. So this one is the beginning of a story that deals with difference, and it's about the client's struggle to understand, the therapist's struggle to understand his client, and it's called Different Again. It felt odd calling him Junior, given that he was in his late 50s and not diminutive in any way, shape or form. He was the tallest and most muscular man I'd ever met, and intimidating simply by being the mass that he was. Despite his physical presence, anyone less imposing was hard to imagine. He spoke with a soft, lilting voice that was reassuring and mesmeric, his Jamaican patois and inflection noticeable only occasionally when it punctuated his educated, received pronunciation. On the phone I hadn't picked up on this slight intonation, and I'd imagined him to be white. On meeting with him in person, I asked straight off how it might be for him to work with a white therapist. "That's why me there," he sang, seeming to deliberately emphasize the patois before reverting to RP. "You have to be white to help me with my issue." My curiosity was instantly aroused. "And that is?" "Racism," he replied. "Ah," I said, words failing me for a moment, as I tried to get my head around what he might be meaning and how therapy might help. I thought it easiest just to ask. "I mean, I want to work out how to deal with racism," he explained in reply. "It's not something I'm unfamiliar with, as you might imagine, but I hadn't expected it on the course I'm doing, and I need to find a way to deal with it." "And the course you're doing is?" "I'm training to be a psychotherapist." "Ah," I said a second time, this time because there were too many words to get my head around, too many questions to know where to start. "Do you want to tell me about the course?" I asked. "You say you're experiencing racism there?" "I think so," he said, leaning forward slightly as if to get a better view of the situation in his mind's eye. "I think it was there right from the start, at the interview." "In what way?" "I suspect they wanted a black guy. I'm the only one on the course, one black guy in a group of 20 whites. When I learnt this at the interview, I told them this wasn't good enough." "And what did they say?" "They looked a bit sheepish," he replied, holding his huge hands together as if in prayer. "They told me apologetically that the therapy world was dominated by whites, and that's why they were so pleased I'd applied." "Yeah, I imagine so," I said. "I guess it looks good for them to have a black guy on the course." "That may be true," I agreed tentatively. "I wonder if they might also have been saying that they were pleased for you, that you were challenging this white domination by applying." Yeah, a token black. Not exactly flooding the market, is it?" It was a surprisingly angry, tangential riposte from this gentle giant, and though I very much wanted to get alongside him, I was struggling. I wasn't getting his point of view about the racism. So far, I hadn't heard anything I would classify in this way with any certainty, and I wanted to challenge him. I wanted to ask if there was a diversity of cultures, races, religions, gender identities and sexual orientations represented on the course. But I stopped myself, as I imagined what this might sound like coming from a representative of the white-dominated therapy world he was joining. "Was there more at the interview that seemed to you like racism?" I asked, choosing my words carefully so as neither to challenge nor collude with his perspective. "Someone asked where I'd come from," he said. "I ask you, how racist can you get?" Again I struggled, this time to stop myself thinking of all the innocuous reasons there may have been for asking this question, like being conversationally curious about where he'd travelled from that day. Okay, one more. And this one is again from the story called 7 Deadly Sins. And again, it shouldn't be too difficult to guess which sin this client represents. And earlier in the story, we learned that the therapist, Michael Martin, has had a very bad night's sleep, very disturbed night's sleep. Even walking through the woods with my dog in the bright morning sunlight doesn't manage to alleviate my disturbed state as it normally might. I just have to hope I can bracket off the sense of unease well enough to work with my clients. Luckily, my first session of the day, an initial interview with a prospective client, distracts me immediately. Lolita's opening gambit, is to tell me I look older in the flesh than on my website. Nothing better to take my mind off things than to be told I've aged since the photo was taken only 6 months ago. I give a slight nod to acknowledge what Lolita has observed and ask her if this is significant to her. "Oh, yes, it is," she answered. "Very much so. You see, I'm looking for a therapist more my own age." I look at her more closely in the ensuing silence, checking on my first impressions. They remain unchanged. I may not be a particularly accurate assessor of age, but despite the youthful years suggested by her black leather miniskirt, already riding up beyond mid-thigh, and pink FC UK t-shirt, the black lettering spanning both her sagging breasts, unlike her fictional namesake, this Lolita is anything but young. In fact, I think Nabokov would have shared my assumption based on the rest of her appearance: white hair, wrinkled face, gnarled and liver-spotted hands, painfully thin wrists, that she has at least a decade on me. Even then, I think I'd be inclined to place her in her 70s. "And you were how old?" I ask, sounding as nonchalant as I can. "I'm 32. She replies, straightening out her wrinkled stockings that I've already marked down in my mind as surgical. Satisfied with her hosiery, she looks me straight in the eye. It feels like a challenge. "Oh, in that case, I'm very much your senior," I announce. "What a pity this means we won't be working together." "Well," she says, elongating this single word in what I imagine is meant to be a salaciously teasing manner, "maybe age isn't everything, you know. You're still quite attractive for your age." "Could this therapist be a woman?" I ask quickly, in a desperate bid to deflect her from further attempts at seduction. "I know several excellent female therapists around your age." "I'm not into women," she announces. "Tried it, of course, but lesbianism doesn't quite do it for me, you know. It's pleasant, but not so satisfying as with a man." "Really?" I say, not really meaning to encourage her, but it does. "Oh, yes, I'm sure you feel the same about women," she goes on. "I mean, it's the difference that counts. You know, if you and I were naked together, well, you'd be captivated by my female genitalia, I'm sure. You wouldn't want me to have a cock, now would you?" I stay stumm. The very thought of her displaying any genitals, male or female, induces my hurriedly eaten breakfast to regurgitate. I swallow back a horridly acidic gob of something I'd rather not identify. "You look a bit green," says Lolita, and I seize the opportunity. "Actually, I'm not feeling at all well," I answer pathetically. "I'm sorry, but I'll have to end our interview. Maybe I could send a list of younger therapists for you to try. Male," she asserts, as if I could have forgotten. "But I'll have a think, you know. You might suit me. I've been feeling horny all through the session, so you must be giving me the right signal."